I'll continue reading Mein Kampf. So yesterday I read until the part where Hitler was talking about his history professor and the situation in Austria. But in the German Empire itself, those who were then its rulers saw nothing of what all this meant. As if struck blind, they stood beside a corpse, and in the very symptoms of decomposition, they believed that they recognized the signs of a renewed vitality. In that unhappy alliance between the young German Empire and the illusory Austrian state, lay the germ of the World War and also of the final collapse. In the subsequent pages of this book, I shall go to the root of the problem. Suffice it to say here that in the very early years of my youth, I came to certain conclusions which I've never abandoned. Indeed, I became more profoundly convinced of them as the years passed. They were that the dissolution of the Austrian Empire is a preliminary condition for the defense of Germany. Further, that national feeling is by no means identical with dynastic patriotism. Finally, and above all, that the House of Habsburg was destined to bring misfortune to the German nation. As a logical consequence of these convictions, there arose in me a feeling of intense love for my German-Austrian home and a profound hatred for the Austrian state. That kind of historical thinking, which was developed in me through my study of history at school, never left me afterwards. World history became more and more an inexhaustible source for the understanding of contemporary historical events, which means politics. Therefore, I will not learn politics but let politics teach me. A precocious revolutionary in politics, I was no less a precocious revolutionary in art. At that time, the provincial capital of Upper Austria had a theatre which, relatively speaking, was not bad. Almost everything was played there. When I was 12 years old, I saw William Tell performed. That was my first experience of the theatre. Some months later, I attended a performance of Lohengrin, the first opera I'd ever heard. I was fascinated at once. My youthful enthusiasm for the Bayreuth master knew no limits. Again and again I was drawn to hear his operas, and today I consider it a great piece of luck that these modest productions in a little provincial city prepared the way and made it possible for me to appreciate the better productions later on. But all this helped to intensify my profound aversion for the career that my father had chosen for me. And this dislike became especially strong as the rough corners of youthful boorishness became worn off, a process which in my case caused a good deal of pain. I became more and more convinced that I should never be happy as a state official, and now that the real school had recognized and acknowledged my aptitude for drawing, my own resolution became all the stronger. Imprecations and threats had no longer had any chance of changing it. I wanted to become a painter, and no power in the world could force me to become a civil servant. The only peculiar feature of this situation now was that as I grew bigger, I became more and more interested in architecture. I considered this fact as a natural development of my flair for painting, and I rejoiced inwardly that the sphere of my artistic interest was thus enlarged. I had no notion that one day it would have to be otherwise. The question of my career was decided much sooner than I could have expected. When I was in my 13th year, my father was suddenly taken from us. He was still in robust health when a stroke of apoplexy painlessly ended his earthly wanderings and left us all deeply bereaved. His most ardent longing was to be able to help his son to advance in a career and thus save me from the harsh ordeal that he himself had to go through. But it appeared to him then as if that longing were all in vain, and yet, though he himself was not conscious of it, he had sown the seeds of a future which neither of us foresaw at that time. At first, nothing changed outwardly. My mother felt it her duty to continue my education in accordance with my father's wishes, which meant that she would have me study for the civil service. For my own part, I was even more firmly determined than ever before that under no circumstances would I become an official of the state. The curriculum and teaching methods followed in the middle school were so far removed from my ideals that I became profoundly indifferent. Illness suddenly came to my assistance. Within a few weeks, it decided my future and put an end to the long-standing family conflict. My lungs became so seriously affected that the doctor advised my mother very strongly not under any circumstances to allow me to take up a career which would necessitate working in an office. He ordered that I should give up attendance at the rescue for a year at least, what I secretly desired for such a long time and had persistently fought for, now became a reality almost at one stroke. Influenced by my illness, my mother agreed that I should leave the rescue and attend the academy. Those were happy days, which appeared to me almost as a dream, but they were bound to remain only a dream. 2 years later, my mother's death put a brutal end to all my fine projects. She succumbed to a long and painful illness, which from the very beginning permitted little hope of recovery. Though expected, her death came as a terrible blow to me. I respected my father, but I loved my mother. Poverty and stern reality forced me to decide promptly. The meager resources of the family had been almost entirely used up through my mother's severe illness. The allowance which came to me as an orphan was not enough for the bare necessities of life. Somehow or other, I would have to earn my own bread. With my clothes and linen packed in a valise and with an indomitable resolution in my heart, I left for Vienna. I hoped to forestall fate as my father had done 50 years before. I was determined to become something, but certainly not a civil servant. Chapter 2: Years of Study and Suffering in Vienna. When my mother died, my fate had already been decided in one respect. During the last months of her illness, I went to Vienna to take the entrance examination for the Academy of Fine Arts. Armed with a bulky packet of sketches, I felt convinced that I should pass the examination quite easily. At the rescue, I was by far the best student in the drawing class, and since that time I had made more than ordinary progress in the practice of drawing. Therefore, I was pleased with myself and was proud and happy at the prospect of what I considered an assured success. But there was one misgiving. It seemed to me that I was better qualified for drawing than for painting, especially in the various branches of architectural drawing. At the same time, my interest in architecture was constantly increasing, and I advanced in this direction at a still more rapid pace after my first visit to Vienna, which lasted 2 weeks. I was not yet 16 years old. I went to the Hof Museum to study the paintings in the art gallery there, but the building itself captured almost all my interest. From early morning until late at night, I spent all my time visiting the various public buildings, and it was the buildings themselves that were always the principal attraction for me. For hours and hours, I could stand in wonderment before the opera and the parliament. The whole ring stress had a magic effect upon me, as if it were a scene from the 1001 Nights. And now I was here for the second time in this beautiful city, impatiently waiting to hear the result of the entrance examination, but proudly confident that I had got through. I was so convinced of my success that when the news that I had failed to pass was brought to me, it struck me like a bolt from the skies. Yet the fact was that I had failed. I went to see the rector and asked him to explain the reasons why they refused to accept me as a student in the General School of Painting, which was part of the academy. He said that the sketches which I had brought with me unquestionably showed that painting was not what I was suited for, but that the same sketches gave clear indications of my aptitude for architectural designing. Therefore, the School of Painting did not come into question for me, but rather the School of Architecture, which also formed part of the academy. At first, it was impossible to understand how this could be so, seeing that I had never been to a school of architecture and had never received any instruction in architectural designing. When I left the Hansen Palace on the Schiller Place, I was quite crestfallen. I felt out of sorts with myself for the first time in my life. In my young life, for what I had heard about my capabilities now appeared to me as a lightning flash, which clearly revealed a dualism under which I had been suffering for a long time. But hitherto I could give no clear account whatsoever of the why and wherefore. Within a few days, I myself also knew that I ought to become an architect. But of course, the way was very difficult. I was now forced bitterly to rue my former conduct in neglecting and despising certain subjects at the real school. Before taking up the courses at the School of Architecture in the academy, it was necessary to attend the technical building school. But the necessary qualification for entrance into this school was a leaving certificate from the middle school, and this simply I did not have. According to the human measure of things, my dream of following an artistic calling seemed beyond the limits of possibility. After the death of my mother, I came to Vienna for the third time. This visit was destined to last several years, since I had been there before I had recovered my old calm and resoluteness. The former self-assurance had come back, and I had my eyes steadily fixed on the goal. I would be an architect. Obstacles are placed across our path in life, not to be boggled at, but to be surmounted. And I was fully determined to surmount this obstacle. Having the picture of my father constantly before my mind, who had raised himself by his own efforts to the position of a civil servant, though he was the poor son of a village shoemaker, I had a better start, and the possibilities of struggling through were better. At that time, my lot in life seemed to be a harsh one, but today I see in it the wise working of Providence. The goddess of fate clutched me in her hands and often threatened to smash me, but the will grew stronger as the obstacles increased, and finally the will triumphed. I'm thankful for that period of my life because it hardened me and enabled me to be as tough as I now am. And I'm even more thankful because I appreciate. I'll stop here, continue tomorrow. See you.